Picture this. You're sitting by a fire thousands of years ago. The night is cold, the forest is alive with strange sounds, and you have no science, no books, no answers. Suddenly, lightning splits the sky. To you, it's not weather, it's a god, furious at something you did. And just like that, a myth is born. But here's the chilling truth. These myths weren't just harmless stories. They shaped human behavior, controlled entire civilizations, and pushed people to do things they might never have done otherwise. Some myths built societies. Others demanded blood. And the shadows of those myths still live with us today. Humans crave meaning. When ancient people couldn't explain why the sun rose, why rivers flooded, or why someone suddenly died, they invented stories. Myths gave answers. But more importantly, myths gave control over fear. Think about it. If you're terrified of death, but someone tells you there's an afterlife paradise, for the obedient, you suddenly have comfort. If you're afraid of chaos, but a priest says the gods demand order, you suddenly have rules. The catch? Once people believed these stories, those in power realized they could turn them into weapons. Take ancient Egypt. Pharaohs weren't just kings. They were gods in human form. To disobey a pharaoh wasn't simply rebellion. It was blasphemy. This myth allowed rulers to command absolute obedience. People spent their entire lives building pyramids, believing it was their duty to serve a divine being. Or look at ancient Greece. Leaders traveled to the Oracle of Delphi for advice. Why? Because the myth said Apollo himself spoke through the priestess. If she declared war, they obeyed. If she demanded peace, they complied. Decisions that shaped history weren't made in palaces. They were made in temples, whispered by a woman in a trance, backed by a myth. In Mesopotamia, yearly floods of the Tigris and Euphrates terrified people. They created myths of angry gods punishing humanity. Priests demanded sacrifices, offerings, and obedience to calm the deities. Natural disasters became a tool for control. Perhaps the darkest manipulation was myths about what happens after death. Egyptians told people about the weighing of the heart, where the soul would be judged. Live a pure life, and you'd enjoy paradise. Lie wickedly, and you'd be devoured by monsters in the afterlife. Imagine how effective this was. People behaved not just out of fear of rulers, but fear of eternal torment. Norse warriors were promised Valhalla, a glorious afterlife reserved for those who died in battle. This myth turned soldiers into fearless killers. Why fear death if death means eternal feasting with gods? In Mesoamerican cultures, myths demanded human sacrifice. People believed the sun itself would stop rising without blood offerings. Thousands marched willingly to their deaths, convinced their sacrifice kept the universe alive. By controlling the narrative of death, myths created psychological chains stronger than any sword. Some myths were so powerful, they convinced humans to kill in ways they never would have otherwise. In Carthage, parents sacrificed children to the god Baal. Archaeologists have found burial sites filled with tiny remains. Why? Because the myth said the god demanded it to protect the city. The Trojan War wasn't just about politics or land. It was wrapped in myths of gods manipulating fate, making warriors believe their bloodshed was part of a divine story. Among the Aztecs, human sacrifice wasn't cruelty, it was survival. They believed without blood, the sun god would die and the world would end. Imagine how strong a myth must be to override the most basic human instinct, survival. Not all myths destroyed. Some united people and gave them unstoppable strength. The Romans believed in the legend of Romulus and Remus, twin brothers raised by a wolf. This story made Romans feel chosen, destined for greatness. It gave soldiers and citizens alike a sense of divine mission, fueling Rome's expansion. In Sparta, the myth of glory and death shaped an entire society. Spartan children were told from birth, Their only purpose was to serve the state and die with honor. Mothers handed sons their shields with the words, "Come back with it or on it." That belief created one of the most disciplined military powers in history. In China, the mandate of heaven myth said emperors ruled because heaven chose them. If disaster struck, it meant the mandate had been lost, and rebellion was justified. This myth shaped politics for centuries, creating a cycle of rise and fall tied to divine approval. Why did myths work so well? Because the human brain is wired for storytelling. A list of rules is forgettable. A story about gods punishing rebels? Unforgettable. This is known today as the narrative effect. People are more likely to change their behavior when it's wrapped inside a story. Ancient leaders didn't have psychology textbooks, but they instinctively knew. If you want to control people, tell them a myth. We've seen how myths explained the unknown and created order. But when stories turn into belief systems, something far darker happens. They stop being just tales and start becoming commands. History is filled with examples where myths turned ordinary people into executioners. In Aztec temples, thousands of captives were marched up stone steps, hearts ripped from their chests, their blood spilled for the gods. To outsiders, it looks brutal. But to the Aztecs, it was duty. The myth said the sun god needed nourishment, or the world would end. And so parents offered children, kings offered prisoners, and victims walked willingly, believing they were saving humanity. In Carthage, the god Baal demanded infant sacrifices. Archaeologists have found urns containing ashes and bones of tiny children, laid as offerings. Why would parents surrender their babies? Because the myth convinced them that only by doing so could they protect the city from destruction. In Greece, the myth of the Trojan War wasn't just a tale. It drove men to fight for 10 years, spurred by the belief that gods themselves were pulling the strings. When people believe they're part of a divine narrative, violence becomes justified, even noble. This is the terrifying psychology of myth. It can flip morality upside down. Killing doesn't feel like murder, it feels like obedience. But myths didn't only destroy, they also forged civilizations stronger than steel. Look at Rome. The story of Romulus, who killed his own brother to found the city, gave Romans a myth of strength, destiny, and sacrifice. Every citizen believed Rome was chosen, and that belief made them expand across continents, unstoppable for centuries. Or take Sparta. Spartan life revolved around the myth of dying with honor. From childhood, boys were trained to fight, told their death in battle would grant eternal glory. This story turned ordinary farmers into fearless warriors, able to face armies far larger than their own. And in China, the mandate of heaven gave emperors legitimacy. As long as harvests were good and disasters rare, the people obeyed. But when famine or earthquake struck, people believed heaven had withdrawn its mandate. Rebellion wasn't just political, it was sacred. This cycle of myth shaped Chinese history for thousands of years. These myths weren't lies to those who believed them. They were the invisible threads binding entire nations together. But myths can also trap the mind. When people believe a story strongly enough, they bend reality to make it true. Take the myth of Oedipus. A prophecy declared he would kill his father and marry his mother. His parents tried to stop it, abandoning him as a baby. But every action taken to escape the myth only brought it closer. In the end, Oedipus fulfilled the prophecy exactly. This is the power of self-fulfilling myths. Once people believe their fate is written, they unconsciously make choices that bring it to life. Centuries later, during witch hunts, myths of curses and dark spirits gripped Europe. Thousands of innocent women were tortured and burned alive, not because of evidence, but because society believed the myth of witches among them. Even modern cults use the same psychology. They tell followers a story of salvation, chosen destiny, or coming apocalypse. Once people buy into the myth, they'll surrender wealth, freedom, even their lives. The ancient formula still works. Why did myths hold such power? Because they worked with the brain's deepest needs. Humans fear chaos, so myths gave order. Humans fear death, so myths promised afterlife. Humans crave purpose, so myths made them chosen. Psychologists today call this the narrative bias. The brain naturally trusts stories more than facts. Leaders and priests didn't need armies of scholars. All they needed was a story that struck the right fear, the right hope, the right desire. Once the story spread, it didn't matter if it was true. Belief made it real. You might think myths belong to dusty temples and forgotten scrolls, but the truth is, they never died. They just changed shape. Look around. Nations are built on founding myths. Flags, anthems, and patriotic stories are modern versions of divine legends. Billions still follow moral codes written thousands of years ago, shaped by ancient myths. Whenever people rally behind a story of a chosen people, a promised land, or a savior destined to return, they are living inside a myth. And those myths still guide behavior, just as they did in Egypt, Rome, and Sparta. The difference is that today, we don't call them myths. We call them culture, tradition, or belief. But the psychology is the same. At their core, myths hacked the most vulnerable part of the human mind, the desperate need for meaning. Without myths, ancient people felt powerless. With myths, they felt chosen. Without myths, life was random. With myths, life had a script. But in the hands of rulers, priests, and conquerors, myths became weapons. Weapons that made people obey, fight, sacrifice, and die. This is the shadow side of human history. Our greatest civilizations were built not only with stone and iron, but with stories strong enough to shape behavior, for better or for worse. And yet, the darkest part of this story isn't ancient at all. Because while we may no longer build pyramids for gods or march to temples for sacrifices, the truth is, we are still living under myths. The question is, do we even realize it? We've seen how myths explained the unknown, demanded blood, and forged empires. But here's where it gets even darker. Myths never truly disappeared. They evolved. And their grip on human behavior may be stronger today than it ever was in the ancient world. Think about it. We no longer kneel before Zeus, Ra, or Baal, but humans still gather around myths only now. They wear modern clothing. Nations rally around flags and anthems as if they are sacred symbols, untouchable and holy. People live, fight, and die for colors on cloth, just as they once did for gods. Political leaders present themselves as chosen saviors of the people, voices of destiny. Ancient pharaohs did the same, calling themselves divine. The costume has changed, but the psychology has not. Entire industries run on myths. Billion-dollar corporations create stories of dreams, freedom, or happiness tied to products. Buy this, wear that, and you're part of the story. Ancient temples demanded gold in the name of gods. Modern companies demand dollars in the name of lifestyle. The form is new. The function is ancient. The reason is simple. The human brain hasn't changed. We still crave meaning. We still fear chaos. We still want to believe there's more than chance shaping our lives. Myths give us a sense of control, even if it's an illusion. And illusions are powerful enough to drive entire civilizations. Think about conspiracy theories today. They're modern myths. They explain chaos with stories of hidden powers, secret rulers, or grand designs. People cling to them not because they're true, but because they give certainty in a world that feels uncertain. This is the exact same psychology that made Egyptians obey pharaohs and Spartans die willingly in war. Here's the paradox. Without myths, humanity might never have survived. Myths gave order when there was none. Myths gave courage to fight impossible battles. Myths inspired art, music, temples, and stories that still shape culture today. But myths also unleashed horror. Wars, sacrifices, oppression, and fear. They chained minds as tightly as iron shackles. So the question isn't just, were myths good or bad? The real question is, can humans live without them? Because even today, the stories we tell ourselves about love, destiny, nations, gods, or even progress are the myths guiding our behavior. Take one of the most powerful modern myths, progress. We believe history is moving forward, that tomorrow will be better than today, that technology, science, and discovery will save us. But think about it carefully. Isn't this just another myth? We repeat it to calm ourselves, just as ancient people repeated stories of gods. We build monuments to progress, skyscrapers, rockets, machines, the same way they built temples and pyramids. And just like them, we pour our wealth, time, and lives into it. Maybe progress is real. Maybe it isn't. But its psychological role is exactly the same as the myths of old. It gives us purpose, hope, and direction. Here's the chilling twist. You, listening to this right now, you're living inside myths too. Your culture, your nation, your beliefs, most of them, are built on stories passed down through generations. Stories you didn't choose. Stories that shaped how you see the world before you even realized it. Ask yourself, why do you believe what you believe? Why do you follow the rules you follow? Why do you fear the things you fear? Chances are the roots go back to myths. Some ancient, some modern. But myths all the same. History warns us what happens when myths are pushed too far. In Rome, emperors declared themselves gods and demanded worship. That arrogance led to downfall. In Mesoamerica, endless sacrifices drained societies until they collapsed. In Europe, myths of superiority sparked centuries of war and conquest. The pattern is clear. Myths can inspire greatness, but also justify cruelty. When belief becomes blind, the myth no longer serves humanity. Humanity serves the myth. So, can we break free from myths? Or are they part of what makes us human? The truth is complicated. Stories are in our DNA. We can't escape them, but we can recognize them. The moment you realize a myth is shaping your behavior, you have a choice. You can follow it consciously, or you can step aside. Ancient people didn't have that luxury. They couldn't separate myth from reality. You do. In the end, myths shaped human behavior in ancient times because they answered the deepest fears and desires of the human mind. They gave us gods who watched over us. They gave us heroes to inspire us. They gave us punishments to control us. And they gave us promises to keep us obedient. But the darkest truth is this. We are still telling ourselves myths today. The names are different. The symbols have changed. But the psychology is identical. So when you hear a story that demands loyalty, obedience, or sacrifice, pause. Ask yourself, is this truth? Or is this just another myth designed to shape your behavior? Because if myths controlled entire civilizations thousands of years ago, what makes you think they aren't controlling you right now? This is the hidden power of myth. It explains our past, shapes our present, and may even decide our future. The question is, will you live inside the myth or step outside it?